Well, welcome back. I'm Heather Groom, and welcome to High on Utah. Today, I've got a special guest. This is one of my good friends, Bergundy Lowe, and she is a title officer at Real Advantage Title, and it's actually in the shared building of my office in Orem.
Yes.
And so she just told me she loves doing podcasts. I'm just kidding. I've actually had to kind of wrangle her and say, Bergundy, you're a wealth of knowledge. I need you to do this podcast because there's so much about title work that people don't understand or they may not, basically I do get a lot of questions about title work and things that are happening. And so anyway, I want to just introduce you quick and maybe just tell us a little bit about you real quick.
Okay. Well, first of all, you said title officer. I am an escrow officer.
Or escrow officer. Yes.
Escrow
thank
officer.
You.
There are
Yes.
title officers, and they are the ones who search the properties, and they
Yes.
have that. They have that
Ability.
license.
Yes.
Title officer license. Yes.
Yes.
Anyways, okay. I have been doing this. I started in September of 2000. As a receptionist
Wow.
at a title company, and just worked my way up from receptionist to escrow assistant to escrow officer. And I've been doing escrow officer for the last, I think, 15 or 16 years.
Wow.
And yes, I
a lot
love
of different
my job.
markets. A lot of different markets
So
you've seen.
many, yes.
And every year there's always a few different things
Yes.
kind of going on,
Yes.
right? So,
Mhm.
well, you've been in it for a while, and I love using Bergundy because I call her up and I'll say, Bergundy, I have this kind of complicated question. And so she's a wealth of knowledge. And so I wanted to have her on our podcast because a lot of times people just don't understand the process in the transaction. And so when we go to list their property, it's interesting because some people call me up and they'll say, oh, we don't need any title work done, or they don't understand what is mandatory, what's, what they have to pay for, fees, things like that. And so I just wanted to kind of do just a short kind of podcast today just about that process, right? And maybe just some things that you may not know that would be good to know because I just had an experience, but we're going to get to that in a little bit about, especially if it's a probate type situation, but we're going to talk about that later.
Yes.
So maybe just kind of walk us through. So, somebody calls me, they say, hey, Heather, I want to list my house. And so we always have all these lingos, right? We have all these acronyms in this industry. And so I'm like, oh, I'll just pull a PR. And they're like, what's a PR?
What is that?
So I'm like, oh, it's a title report. So maybe just take us kind of from there. So when somebody calls me and they say, hey, I'm about ready to list my property, then what I do, we get, the address, everything. And then I call Bergundy or I send her a message and I say, hey, Bergundy, why don't you pull the title report? And then maybe why don't you take it from there?
Yeah.
What happens?
So once the title report is done, and it takes us 24 to 48 hours to search the property.
And what does that report? I should actually rewind. What even is a title report? Why don't you just answer that too?
So it's a commitment for title insurance. So it's preliminary report is what PR stands for. And it's a commitment for title insurance saying we as the title company are willing to insure this property based on what we found on this report.
Perfect.
So when the listing title report is done, we can go through and make sure that your sellers are the ones vested on the property and make sure that their taxes have been paid and see if
no liens,
yes,
things like that. Construction liens. People don't understand construction liens, and maybe talk about that because in the state of Utah, they can actually put a little bit of a lien on your property. So maybe kind of talk
we
about
do.
that.
Now, I know not every title company does this, but we do what's called a search on the state construction registry on every file that we close. And this is something that somebody can go in and do a preliminary filing on your property without recording it at the county. They can do a preliminary filing, and then that gives them a longer period to do a mechanics lien or construction lien on the property. So we check that on every file, whether it's a sale or purchase.
So important.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, we wait for a buyer to come. We usually get in touch with the seller during the listing process and just get their information. We need their social security numbers and their date of
Yes.
birth so that we can do what's called a judgment search. So we search every name that's recorded on the property and the names of the buyers that are purchasing the property. We want to make sure that there's no judgments, state tax liens, federal tax liens
It's even, and
against
it's the
these
same
people.
person, because I've
Yeah.
had things happen. In fact, I just even had one where somebody had refinanced and the mortgage company had made a mistake and didn't, the old mortgage company had not pulled off their
Oh, their
lien
deed of
and
trust.
their deed of trust. And so they like it, we had to kind of go through a little process on that.
Yep.
So there's a system. And so there's a reason that we pull that title report, because there's so many things, and even names. Like, how
Yeah.
often do you see that maybe there's not the correct name?
Yeah.
You know?
And it doesn't happen as much.
Every day.
Yes,
No, for
it
sure.
doesn't happen all the time. But, you think that the seller of the home is husband and wife, and really the seller of the home is an LLC of which they are the members of,
That's right.
or a trust of which they're the trustees of. But, the listing agreement and or purchase contract that you have signed should be the name of the trust or the name of the LLC instead of those two individually.
That's
So
right.
there's things like that we, make sure so that you get all your documents correct as well.
Right. And it's also a protection even with fraud and other things,
Yes.
like, because that is very important.
Mhm.
You hear these stories, and I've known some people even personally that kind of there was a scam, they didn't even
Yes.
realize it, and they basically had put their name on title, and it was just really complicated.
Yeah.
And so you have to be just really careful about things like that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
okay, so title report you send back to me. We're like, okay, we're listing the property, and then we find a buyer. We kind of march forward. You dialogue with, a lot of times, with the seller.
Mhm.
And you say, okay, so kind of, maybe one of the questions I get a lot of is, basically, like, what are fees
Yeah.
usually?
What fees?
Like,
Mhm.
what kind of, or what are those fees, and is it mandatory to have policies, like, for the seller, for the buyer? Maybe answer
Yes,
that.
I would love to. So the seller pays for the owner's policy, which insures the buyer. So they are saying, we are selling this house to you free and clear of any liens or encumbrances. And we, as the title company, insure that. Now, in the Utah real estate purchase
Yes.
contract, it does say that the seller will pay for the Alta homeowner's policy. If it's a home on land, it's different. They
Yep.
just do the standard owners. And so the seller pays for that for the buyer, and then the buyer pays for a lender's policy, which ensures their lender is in first lien position. So anything that had, a mortgage that was on the property was paid off and released, and their lien is now first position. So we coordinate with buyer's lender and seller, and then bring everybody together for a closing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And what about fees? Like, and what,
Oh,
so
yeah.
kind of those mandatory, and in the state of Utah, what is the rule as far as, like, what mandatory policies are there?
The only mandatory one, because of the real estate purchase contract, is that owner's policy. We then, in order to do a closing, we have to issue a policy.
Right.
So the owner's policy, and then we just charge like a settlement fee of some kind. So the seller's fees. Now, the seller's fees are based on the sales price.
Right.
So a $400,000 house, the owner's policy premium is going to be a lot less than a $900,000 sales price.
Right. And that is important to know, because I've had people come back and go, well, why is that one I
So
just
much
paid so
higher.
much higher?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And and it's not something that, as a buyer, you get a loan estimate saying these are what your fees are going to be. And really, as a seller, you don't see things like that until like closing. They might know that they're going to pay commission, but and they have to pay off their mortgage, but they don't really know that there are other fees involved.
Yes.
So
because people will say, I've paid my house.
Uh-huh.
And my house is paid off. I own it. I
Yep.
don't have a loan on it. And so
I'm just
then
here to sign.
I
Why
just,
do I
yeah,
have to pay for
wait, what are you
anything?
talking about?
Yeah.
There's fees, And so I always like to prepare people ahead of time because they don't, they just don't know that,
Yep. Yep. Yes, because it's different than a car where you just, have a title in hand, sign it, and give it to the
Yes.
buyer. That is not at all how a house goes. A warranty deed is recorded on the property from seller to buyer, and that's your title to the property.
Yeah.
So it's so much different than,
I love that analogy of the car because that's so true. Because
Yeah.
I think people do have that understanding that it's just going to be like, oh, I'm showing
Here's
up
my
to the
title.
title
Uh-huh.
company and I'm handing over my title. And I'm like, yeah. And I've had a few interesting stories actually about that too, because, on a little bit of a tangent, but I had somebody who called and he was all into paying cash for everything.
Okay.
Right. And so he
Okay.
was a cash buyer and basically he wanted to buy the home in cash and he had over $200,000 in cash.
Oh, like bills.
Like bills.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so when I asked him for proof of funds, I don't make this stuff up, you all, okay? I said we have to show proof of funds, and he's like, well, I'm just gonna buy this property and show up at title with my cash, my bills. Okay, we're gonna talk about that in a second.
Mhm.
So he shows up, and he doesn't show up yet, but he calls me and he's like, and I said, well, I've got to see proof of funds, and I'm with the bills thing, I had to kind of look that up because I'm like. You can't bring $200,000 in bills, but he literally had 200,000, and he took pictures. I'm not making this up, of the cash in Home Depot buckets. The orange buckets.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
And
just full of money.
Full of money, and he had 3 buckets and said,
"There's
that's
your proof."
$200,000. And I said, wow. Yeah, I like so many things on that. But anyway, because I'm just thinking of the depreciation of that money and how long he's had it in his mattress or room.
In
I don't
the
know.
buckets?
I don't know. In the basement, in the buckets, right? And and he was expecting to be able to go and show up at closing and pay in cash. And so even once I did verify it, because I was like, well, first of all, that's not really proof of funds because like that could be a picture on the internet that you've taken, and not to say that I'm making that accusation, but we got rules here. We got rules, right?
Yeah.
And this is not like the olden days of, hey, yeah, I'm just gonna show up
with cash.
And so I said, so what is that? Do you know the cash amount? Like, what is that amount that somebody can in actual bills?
And I don't.
I'm putting Bergundy on the spot right now, but
well, I think,
and I don't even know if they can. I can't remember. He had to make an appointment at his bank. This is a true story. He had to go to a bank, make an appointment because basically they could think that it's drug money or anything else, right?
Yeah.
And if you knew the guy, he was like 65, 70. And I'm like, so I was kind of okay. Like, I was like, okay, but I just kind of knew his background. So, but yeah, like he had to make an appointment and actually take the Home Depot buckets and open a bank account. They had to count it a certain way. It had to clear. It took actually a little bit of time. So just a little story on that. And I'm sure that's not the average of everybody watching this, but I kind of share that because you can't just show up with cash.
Well,
anymore.
and even checks. So 10,000,
yes,
anything over 10,000, I think we as title companies have to like fill out forms to send to the state or something. So we don't really take cash anymore. When I first started, I feel like we did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I kind of remember
$10,000.
I think it was like there was a time when we had a few $1,000s you could actually bring in cash, because I do remember actually that. And even now with checks, we have to be really careful.
We do,
right?
yes. So we can accept a cashier's check up to $10,000 as well. However, a personal check we cannot accept. Maybe, $300, $400. But yeah, I think a lot of people think that they can just come to closing, bring their checkbook, their checkbook and leave it with us. And that's just not a thing we can do anymore. And
Yes.
it's actually Utah state law that says that anything over $10,000 is required to be wired.
Yes.
Um,
And remember that $10,000
Yep.
required wiring.
Yes. And that's not really a title company thing. That's
No, it's a state of Utah.
Yeah,
Yep.
state of Utah thing.
Mhm. And every state, I also want to kind of point out, every state has different rules around wiring, and also just kind of their title
Oh, yeah.
process.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
California is
So
very
much
different.
different.
When I have somebody moving here from California, I mean, they can put holds on the account and money. So that's why I'm always like, don't wait until closing. Like we're like settlement day. Like we got to have a plan in place a little earlier when you're transferring funds.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So
And wire transfers are considered good funds. And
Yes,
usually,
absolutely.
if someone sends a wire in the morning, we get it between 2 and 4 hours for it to go through, the Federal Reserve and then hit our account. And we can record in the afternoon. But if someone goes to their bank at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that probably isn't going to get to us till the day after.
And we've all had that happen or
Yes.
seen that happen.
Yes, we have. And we can't, I mean, this is another
Yes.
process, but we can't record, transferring title to the buyer's name until we have the wire from buyer and or buyer's lender.
Yep. And that's important to point out because some people are like, well, I have to move in,
Uh-huh.
and I've had this happen a few times. And I'm like,
Where's my keys?
we cannot give keys until everything is funded and recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to make sure everything happens in that process,
Yes.
And
Yes.
that can include FedEx problems because we've had
that.
FedEx,
Mhm.
UPS problems with documents. Bernie and I have lived through one of those.
Yeah.
And the other thing to keep in mind is even signing.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe you can touch on that even a little bit, but sometimes in the state of Utah, you sometimes do need wet signatures, right,
Yes.
for things. But other times you can DocuSign,
Yeah, and we as a title company can accept electronic signatures for all cash buyers. However, a seller has specifically the deed, and then we have a couple of other documents that have to be signed in front of a notary public. So if we have a seller that lives out of state or is on vacation or something like that, we usually hire a mobile notary to go to them
Yep.
and have them sign and then send us documents back. Now, there is a remote online notary these days where it's all done on your phone or
It's kind of like they
laptop.
dial in. It's almost like a Zoom.
Yeah, it's like a
meeting, like a
Zoom.
Zoom, and
Mhm. So we do have that option, but it's not me doing it.
and it's not always. I've had some lending institutions that don't accept that.
it. They
and so
don't.
you have to be careful because people think, oh, well, it doesn't matter that I'm out of town for business on near closing, and I'm like, or settlement date, and I'm like, listen, I got to know who's on title, who needs to sign, and let's make sure
Where you're
that
going.
where you're going, because then we got to build a plan backwards. I have a lot of clients that travel for, business and things, and I'm like, then we've got to kind of plan out everything so it all hits in time.
Yep.
Yes.
And that is true. Now, buyers, so that was the seller side. Buyers, lenders, don't. Most lenders don't yet have the entire package electronically signed. They send over, now they can have what's called a hybrid closing. So they sign quite a few of the disclosure documents just online, but they still
kind of like
send-
beforehand,
Yes.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Because not everything needs a notary.
Right.
So it's like there's some things that can.
Yes, but they still send us, the promissory note that has to be signed on the same document with all buyers. So if I have a buyer here in Utah and a buyer in California, we have to figure out how to get the document to the buyer in California and then overnight back to me so that the buyer here in Utah can sign the same document.
We've had fun once before when we had
California, Idaho.
We had buyers in two different states because the one was on vacation, one was on a work thing. And then, so they were in two different states and they had to be on the same
documents
and the wet signatures. So we had to basically be signing days ahead of time.
Yep.
And then also, and then again on the seller side, they were also gone, if I remember right. So it was kind
Yeah.
of like we had these two buyers in different states. The seller was also not here. So we kind of had to do a very complicated schedule and really hope that FedEx and UPS would work out. And so
And
that's
it
why I don't like to cut it so close,
and it didn't,
Yeah.
because I think one of the buyers or something signed too late in
Well,
Idaho, and
well,
so they didn't get it in FedEx or
the problem
something.
was if it's in a rural area and the drop
Yes,
box,
that's
it was
another
actually
thing.
a FedEx problem.
Yep.
It was we got the notary there in time, but she didn't check the
Uh-huh.
box. And we said, check you have to have this in the mail by 4 p.m. By 4
Yeah.
p.m. by 4 p.m. at this box. And the notary had put it in a different box
Uh-huh.
and basically just thought that all FedEx drops
We're the same.
were the same. They are
Yes.
not all the same. Okay.
Yes.
So, but that one, it ended up working out and it was okay. But like I said, there's sometimes things that impact us. Even like right now, I just got a notification today on my phone. FedEx must just know me or something. But FedEx was like, hey, we are having problems because of the cold back east. Then some of the,
Oh.
like we have something
Yeah.
that's supposed to arrive and it's maybe going to be delayed a day.
Oh, yeah.
And so, take all those things into account and
Consideration. Yep.
consideration. And when you do go under contract, you want to look at the dates. And it's not that you have to be in town because we've done plenty that
Yes.
are not in town.
Yes.
But we just have to have that plan
Mhm.
ahead of time.
Mhm.
And also just know who's signing.
Yeah.
Because one of the other things I think I should point out is like for an LLC,
Yes.
because people don't realize there's usually the LLC paperwork that says who can sign
Sign.
for that LLC. Am I
Mhm.
right on that?
Yes, for an LLC, there's articles of organization, which
Yes.
name the managers and or members. And then they also have an operating agreement
That's
that
right.
says whether or not the members can sign or the
Mhm.
managers can sign.
Very important
So,
difference.
yep.
Members and managers. So
Yes.
I'm kind of trying, we're going to touch on that for a
Yes.
second because I have had that situation before where somebody went out of the country, but they weren't a signer. They weren't designated in
Yes.
as a signer in the articles
Mhm.
of incorporation. So you've
Mhm.
got to be really in the operation agreement, like you
Yeah.
said.
And we as the title company, that's something that we request from sellers when we're talking to them.
Early.
Yes, so
Yes.
that we know, who it does have to come to closing,
Yes.
to sign the closing documents. Um,
No, I think that's good.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. And one other one that I've seen happen is with issues of probate. So, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, what do you recommend? Because a lot of times people don't even know. Like, maybe their parents are getting older and maybe they're in an assisted living and they think, oh, everything's
Yeah.
just fine because mom and dad have owned this
This
house
house
again
forever.
and it's paid off. And they
Mhm.
think that it's going to be something a little more simple.
Yeah. If mom and dad are on title, um, as joint tenants,
Hmm.
then, if dad dies and mom's still alive, dad's interest automatically gets transferred to mom. And then when mom dies, mom's estate has to go through probate because now her
That's right.
interest hasn't been transferred to anyone because she was on title individually. Now, what I kind of like to recommend to people in closings is if this is your primary residence, make a trust. Put your
Yes.
property into the trust.
A living trust.
Yep, the living trust. And then, the trust instructs who would take over as successor trustee once
Mhm.
mom and dad have passed away.
And I've seen cases, not to be a downer here, but I have seen cases where people did not put that in a trust and
Yeah.
then they had to go to probate.
Yes.
And then that's going to cost you thousands of dollars. You've got to hire an attorney. I mean, there's a whole process to that. And it could have actually been, prevented pretty easily.
Very easily.
And so that's something that I think is really important. I talk to people about living trust, and I just even had an experience not very long ago with some clients, and they were wanting to sell the mom's home because, again, just like you said, the dad he had passed away. The mom had it. They were moving her to an assisted living. I kid you not. This is a true story, and I went over. I met with them just to walk the house, and I found out that it wasn't in a living trust. And the mom was in this assisted living center, not doing super great. They'd moved her, and I asked him. I said, "Do you know?" Because I mean, this is just a listing appointment,
Yeah.
like talking about listing. I was like walking, counting bedrooms, bathrooms, that kind of stuff. And I said, "Okay, so this is in a living trust, right?" And they said, "Well, no, we've been thinking about putting it in. This is a true story." I said, "Go home. Like as soon as I am done today, you need to start this process
Uh-huh.
and get this in a trust, right?" That night, the mom has some little situation at the assisted living center, goes into the hospital and is in critical condition.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and the reason I tell you this is because I mean it was crazy. So they had just started this
Oh
process.
yeah.
I'm in touch with them the whole time, and I'm like, okay, we got to, if she has any moment of clarity, like, because you
We
can't
got to get a
sign things,
notary there.
because you know as well as I do, like, you can't sign anything unless you are, like, you can't help your mom sign documents,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, with
Mhm.
their hand. And so they have to be of kind of sound mind and everything. And so, anyway, she's in critical condition. And anyway, after about, I think it was about a week, she kind of came out of it and she did well. And they had the docs ready and they're like,
Oh.
okay. And they had somebody go and they talked to her and then they did it. They had a remote notary. They did all this. She improves for a few days, a little while, and then she just suddenly passes away.
Oh my
And if
gosh.
they would not have done that,
Yep.
and it was a complicated family situation too, with siblings and half siblings and things like that,
Oh yeah.
that it can get really
Really.
beastly, right?
Mhm.
Real quick. And so, luckily, they had that signed document. It saved them so much time, because it was, and money
Yes.
also,
Yes.
because then when, the mom suddenly passed away, it was like, okay, now it was kind of a shock because she had just improved and then she passed away. But then we were able to sell the home right away. We were able to list right away.
Yep.
We didn't have any problem with that.
Yes.
And so, I actually, after I did like a search on my title and said, hey,
Mhm.
okay, I want to make
What do
sure
I-
we have all of our properties in the right names. Do we have all of our organizational documents in place? Because if you have even a rental property,
Yes.
right? Or an
Yes.
investment property.
Yes, and with rentals and investments, usually I recommend, and I think you like this too, is put that in an LLC.
Absolutely. 100%.
Right?
Yep.
So make an LLC for that you can put every rental property in, or make an LLC for each one.
Or a few.
I've seen.
I have I have some that are individual properties.
Yeah.
And then I have some that maybe have like 2 properties in one LLC.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is protection for you.
Yes.
Right? So that the LLC owns the property. So if somebody.
It's an extra layer, also to just
Mhm.
protect you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's also important as well. But again, kind of touching on the probate.
Yes.
Like like right now, I don't care what your age is, just know that and don't forget it. And if you're just even, because people that are young and they're buying a first home,
yeah.
they're like,
I don't need
I
that.
don't need that.
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
Yes.
And it's really important to do that. And you can find these docs online.
Oh, yeah. Yep, it's
and
easy.
actually the state of Utah has an amazing website. I think they won an award for it, but it's how just forming your own LLC. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
used to have to go to a CPA, have them form
Mhm.
it. It usually cost anywhere from $350 to $1,000, depending on whatever the going rate was.
Yes.
Now Utah, if you're in Utah, and most states are coming around to that, where you can
can
go in on the state portal and register your own LLC.
And I think it costs like $8
I
or
want to say
something, right?
it was like 10.
Yeah.
It was so
Yeah,
cheap.
it was.
So just do that.
Mhm.
And so it's just really smart to do anyway.
One of the things that a lot of people don't know is whether or not they're on title as joint tenants.
Yes.
And in the example that I said earlier, if mom and dad are on title as joint tenants, then when dad passes away, his interest automatically transfers to mom. However, if they are
There's a
not
however.
on
Yep.
title as joint tenants, If dad passes away, his interest has to go through probate because it doesn't automatically go to mom. So that's another thing to kind of look
Maybe
at.
repeat that again because I think that that's super important. So if the dad passes away, let's just say one of them passes away,
Yes.
then
Yes.
walk us through that.
Okay, if they're not on title as joint tenants and dad
Mhm.
passes away, his interest has to go through probate in order for mom
Mhm.
to, be able
Basically
to,
have the property.
yeah, yes, be
Mhm.
able to have the property still in her name. So you always want to make sure that when you buy a property with a lender and
Mhm.
or cash, that the deed to the property goes is recorded as husband and wife as joint
Joint
tenants
tenants.
or
Yep.
whatever, because you don't want to have to go through the probate process for just dad's
And because
interest.
of that, and I've had clients in that situation before too. I mean, I
Yeah.
had that happen too, where the
Yeah.
mom suddenly passed away during COVID,
Oh
and the
yeah.
wife, and they had been in the same house for 50 years. And at 50 years, and she had COVID, she recovered, and then she suddenly just passed away. And it was kind of a shock. And that was kind of like they just went, oh wait, I don't think I
What do
have
we
that
do?
all recorded right
Yep.
and everything. And so the best thing you can do is plan ahead and ask questions.
Ask
Like
questions.
call Burgundy, ask
Yep.
her because it's the most important thing because I mean, people just don't think about it and they don't realize the time that would take and the money
Yes.
for probate. You do
Yeah.
not, and this is just, I mean, otherwise you can, um, change title like very easily
Yeah,
even
we as
and
a
add
title
it. Yeah.
companies prepare those for you, and we charge like
I was
$90.
gonna say, like, we're talking $100,
Yeah,
you know?
it's so cheap to do, and it takes one signature in order to do it.
Yes.
I just had an example of somebody who, her husband died. He was the one on the mortgage. She wasn't on the mortgage, but they had put their house into the trust, and so she was
Okay.
protected. However, the mortgage company, she sent the mortgage payment in, and they sent it back. And then
Interesting.
told
Huh.
her that she needed to change the title into her name only. She got in touch with me, thank goodness, and I said, "No, no."
By the way, I've had that exact thing happen a few times lately,
Yeah.
and I don't know what is going on with
With
that,
these mortgage
with these
companies,
mortgage
I said, "This
companies.
is what you need to do. You need to send the death certificate
Yep.
and the deed that shows that the property is in the trust to the mortgage company, and they can fix it from there. But do not change title to your name only." Anyway,
No.
she sent it all in. She texted me a week later and said, "It's all resolved."
But you
So
know
if
what?
she would
I've
have done
seen that,
it,
and you know what's terrible? I actually just talked to someone, same kind of situation. The husband had passed away, and she was told somebody, because they're calling an 800
800 number.
number.
Yep.
And so you don't know who you're talking to and how much experience, and most likely it's not a lot of experience.
Right.
And they might even not even be in the country. They may not even know what the rules are in Utah.
Yeah.
So they were telling her she had to refinance and she
Oh.
had like a 3% interest rate. And I said,
No.
no, you are not refinancing. And because your husband passed away, no, 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 you are
Yeah.
not refinancing. And
Yeah.
she was on the brink.
Of
Like they had
pulling the
already
trigger. Yep.
pulled her credit and already were kind of starting this loan application. And I was like, whoa, like no. And she wouldn't, I mean, she would be paying so
So
much
much
more. And
more.
she was like, wait, I don't have to refinance if my
Yeah.
spouse dies. Remember that.
Yep.
You do not have to refinance if your spouse dies,
Even if you're not on the mortgage.
even if you're not on the mortgage. So again, in those situations, you really need to have a good title person.
Yep.
And you need to have a good realtor.
Yep.
Because again, it's all of these situational life events, right?
It is.
And being organized,
Uh-huh.
with that, because again, it's $100
Yeah.
where you're
For
going to be talking thousands of
thousands
dollars
to go
and
through
time
probate. Yeah.
and what I call brain damage. There's the brain damage effect of, "Oh, I don't have time for this, but I have to do it.
Mhm. And by that time, it's the kids of the mom and dad that have died. They don't know,
Oh,
what to do. Yeah.
my
It
clients
just
that I told the story about the mom and everything. I mean, it was really crazy because I'm friends with that family. I ended up even going to the funeral, like
Yeah.
for that family. And then we ended
Yeah.
up listing it. And it was so sweet. I love them. If they're listening, they know who they are. But I love them so much. And they almost cried at the table. And I get emotional telling this because they were like, we had no idea. And they brought me a little cake. It was so cute. I was like, I'm bringing
Aw.
you a gift, but they brought me this little cake, and it was really sweet. But they were just like, we if we would not have known that and done that at the time
Yep.
that we
The
did it, like they would have missed their little window of
window.
opportunity.
Yep.
And I can't even tell you how much brain damage with, especially the sibling kind of situation. And, it's like her kind of, and it gets complicated.
It does. And I hear just major stories of, once money's involved, it gets ugly with
You never know.
even brothers
You just
and
never know.
sisters.
Yeah. And people remember things, and sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just people remember things
Yep.
differently.
Yep.
So it's what is recorded, what is written.
Yep.
And
Yep.
go with that. And so
It's
that's
gonna make your life a lot easier.
it will, for sure. Let's see. What about I guess in kind of closing, like we've kind of
Yeah.
had a good little chat. I'm gonna have to have you
Yes.
back again. But I would say, what are some things that people is there anything else that maybe they should know or prepare? So like we're talking about maybe for probate, maybe also like marriage, because I also see a lot of people when they're divorcing
Mm-hmm.
and they don't understand even what's in their what do you
Divorce
call
decree?
that? Their divorce decree. Yes.
Yeah.
And they will go, wait, I have to sell this house in 18 months. Like
Yeah.
they don't process that.
Yep.
Or it's, oh, this, whatever's going to happen,
Mhm.
and so they maybe don't even understand
Understand.
that as well. But those are kind of situational life events, and life just happens.
A lot. Yes. And so the divorce decree is the instructions to us as the title company of what to do with the house, right? Deeded to wife, deeded to husband. However, a divorce decree, if the real estate is mentioned in the divorce decree, it comes up as an exception on our title report. So we as a title company have to clear that in order for that not to show up on the policy. So a lot of times, loan officers, sellers, or, people that got divorced, they don't know that we're going to be calling them and saying,
Yep.
you've got to come in and sign a quitclaim deed that releases your right, title, and interest to this property. Once you get your money from the
divorce,
wife
yeah.
or whatever. And, we have to be that person who calls them. So it is something
And
that
people
we
get
are
angry
involved
because
in a
I've had
lot.
that happen.
Oh,
I remember we've
yeah.
had, I think, one between us that I remember that,
Yep.
they kind of called because they were angry. They're like, well, I don't want to talk about my ex-husband or whatever.
Yep.
And I'm like, we've got to.
Uh-huh.
It's not a
Mhm.
me thing. It's not a you thing,
Yep.
but,
Yep.
depending on how things are written out for the divorce, then,
Yeah.
it's like you said, it's instructions,
It's instructions
on
to
what
us.
has to happen.
And as the escrow officer, we are the non-affiliated third party. So, we bring in ex-wife and ex-husband, and we are the party that just
And they don't
says-
have to see each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do 2 different closings, no problem. But we are the party that says, I understand you. I take instruction from this document,
Mhm.
or, both of you are agreeing on this closing disclosure or settlement statement saying that this is what you're getting. So, they are a little bit trickier. But we do them all the time.
And again, just don't refinance. Don't do anything
Yes.
like willy-nilly, because I have people that sometimes think it's kind of like a FSBO type situation. What I mean by it's like for sale by owner. It's like people are like, I'm going to become an expert on my own first transaction. And I'm like, you know what? I wasn't an expert on my own first transaction. So,
Yeah.
it's like, if you think that you are really risking yourself.
Oh, yes.
And again, I want to touch on one other thing kind of before we end too, and that's probably on just kind of title and wire fraud and things like that, because I know you've seen it. I've seen it many times. And we give very strict instructions that we
Yes.
say, and I always, this is what I love about working with Bergundy. I will even say, please call Bergundy.
Yes.
Please call the office. If you have a doubt, or even just I like them to just call and say, I received these wire instructions. And I'm like, and the sweet person at the front desk will tell you that it is real or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, you know what? I would rather you call the office.
Yes.
Because they're like, I don't want to bug you. I'm like, bug. Yes, please do.
Saturday night, bug.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm just like, send an email, do whatever, but and call. And before, just say, okay, I received this. And now we have portals, like there's secure portals, which have been very helpful.
It has been, yes.
It's been a lot easier lately, because there have been times where, if somebody's just emailing a document.
A PDF.
PDF that says, oh, go wire, $120,000 to this account,
Yeah.
I always say red flag if it mentions Western Union. And the other thing I always point out is I always say, every time you receive an email from the title company, I want you to check what email address it's coming from. Because if it's like and I've even made this mistake. I'm going to tell you really honestly, I one time got something that looked pretty legit. They had hacked into a system. They had stolen the logo.
Yep.
And it looked great. And when it comes in on your email, especially if you're on your phone, it just says Heather Groom. And then it'll say whatever they kind of want it to say from, right? So then it would say Real Advantage Title or whatever.
Right.
And, but I didn't click to see what the actual email address was. And what it really was, we'll say Bergundy. Right now it'll say like, Bergundy Real Advantage 1234 at Gmail.
Yep.
That is a sign right there. Okay. If it's a Gmail address, sirens going off, alert. And so I tell people, I'm like, click anytime that you have anything that comes from title, make sure it's really from a legit email address.
Yeah. And I think most title companies have just stopped just sending them PDFs.
I agree. Yeah.
And we all have these, secure software systems that send them out to buyers and sellers. I think this is maybe a personal thing that I like. Like, I just like them to come to closing and I hand them to them. I know that always can't happen because they're closing scheduled for 2:00 and we need to record that day and they need to send their wire before they get there. So it can't always happen, but I do send them and then I say, call me. And they can call me on my cell phone. All I need to do is confirm the bank name and routing number, the account name and account number. And we're on and off the phone in 1 minute, but it saves you
and it's peace of mind.
Yeah.
And it's peace of mind, really, because just so that also that everything is going well and, but there are people that I know even that have lost money or, like you think of all the scams out there. And while we're improving our processes, I always like to tell people, I'm like, hey, it's great that there's secure portals and we're improving our processes, but you also have the scammers and they're improving their processes as well. So we have both sides improving processes right now.
Yes.
So it's kind of this whole thing of we just need to keep up on that,
Yeah.
So, but I think that that's really good information,
Yeah.
I think that's great. And so I'm glad that you were here today. Anything else like that we should, kind of know about the title process? Is there any other little thing?
And I would love to come back and talk some more.
Yes.
The one thing that I do want that I think, as a buyer and seller, you kind of don't know. And even as an agent, you're like, okay, what happens after we go in and sign the documents at the closing?
Ooh, I love this. Okay, I'm so glad you're touching on this.
Right?
Yes.
If we are closing the buyer side of the transaction, we have to wait for the wire to come from the buyer and the wire to come from the lender. And then
what we mean by that is like if it's down payment.
Yep, down payment.
Like down payment from the buyer. And then money from the lender. Yep.
And then here in Utah, and I don't think this is everywhere, but here in Utah, we do what's called split closings.
Yes.
Where a buyer closes at one title company and the seller closes at a totally different title company. So we, as the title companies, coordinate recording, funding and recording between us. So if we close the buyer side, we have to wire to the seller's title company for them to record the warranty deed, which transfers title to the buyer's names, and then we record the deed of trust. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Like, it is we get the wires, we wire out, then we record, and then we disperse. So it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. And if there's a delay, it changes the amounts also.
Yes.
So like every day,
Every day.
So, but I think most people kind of, because they don't know the, what I call in back of the curtain of what's going on, they just feel like it should just be instant.
Yeah, I went and signed.
Hey, I signed, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, well, okay. So like if the funds, like sometimes we're waiting sometimes on paperwork. Why lenders also matter is because like they need to get the paperwork on time, to everyone, and to the title company, because then you have to balance everything out and say, okay, like, because everything is prorated. There's nothing for free. Like when people are like, oh, well, I want to close on this day because then I don't have to pay. I'm like, well, you are paying it. You do know this. Like, it's like they'll say, oh, but I'm not having to pay at that day or whatever. And I'm like, well, you are in your closing costs.
Yes.
And so, yes, there's ways to kind of jiggle things around, but money is money, and it's spreadsheet, and it is predictable, and it is there. And so
every single
time.
Yeah.
So that's why it also gets complicated when we're dealing with multiple parties and signing and everything, and we stick to the Rep C contract because we're like, we want to be on this date so everyone is very clear, and so that title can prepare all the amounts, everything, and know what we need to do in order to record and on time.
Yes.
Right?
Because the recording is what has to happen in order for buyers to get keys.
And we are depending on the county too. Just remember, there's a county component to all of this as well, so that if it's a holiday, like yesterday, it was a bank holiday. So even if you're not observing Columbus Day, it's you know what? It's just a holiday that the banks do. And so like a lot of times, even when I'm writing up a Rep C, I'm always like, what holiday am I working with? Like Easter or, Good Friday, for example. And like I said, it doesn't matter if you're celebrating a holiday, you got to kind of work around some of those other dates.
That it's a federal and or state holiday. Yeah. And I don't know that everybody thinks about that.
No. Nope, they absolutely do not. Because I've actually, on different contracts, I know I'm a little OCD on certain things, right? But I will say on some contracts, like I remember one time having our due diligence was like on Easter. And I was like, wait, no. Or settlement on like Good Friday. And I was like, that date not happening. Yeah.
Well, even if like they put settlement deadline on like a Sunday, which means you have to close the Friday before.
Yes. That's one reason I like to do like Thursdays. I'm kind of because also like even on like December 31st, we ran into this too, where, people are like, hey, I want to record. Well, the county was like, there were certain counties that actually were going to be closed
or closed half day.
Or half day. And they were like, we're done. And you don't know if they're drinking eggnog early. So you better get your stuff in and done. And like I said, so I don't like surprises.
Yeah.
And I love that about Bergundy and Real Advantage. And just, it's like, none of us like those kind of ugly surprises. So that's why I like being prepared, in advance, knowing. And I think the education piece for all of this is really important because, again, don't bring cash in buckets to closing. There's a lot of things that people don't realize. And especially I found that with my clients that haven't bought or sold a home in like 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
It's very different. And we're dealing in a totally different age. And so I like to really be very hands-on and walk them through that. And I know you've been so great with my clients that way as well, where you've walked them through and said, okay, here's the changes.
Yeah.
Like, here are some ways that we're going to be doing this a little differently. And because again, like the check piece too, as a reminder, it's not like you can just bring in a check and people are like, hey, I'm just going to bring in a check for $50,000 as my down payment.
Yeah.
Nope.
Can't do it.
Can't do that.
Yeah.
So just know there's a lot that is going on, and there's a lot behind the scenes, and we're dealing with multiple parties. Like with title, I'm like, you're dealing with another title company oftentimes, although it is great when we can use both sides, because that just kind of simplifies it a little bit. But you're dealing with that. You're dealing with county. You're dealing with lenders. You're dealing with banks. I mean,
Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve. We got all the stuff. And so, it's like people just, don't understand. And we actually, what I love is I'm always like, it's amazing that we can close and fund and record on the same day. And people are just like, maybe they're not as impressed, but they don't understand what that means. And I'm like, what all goes into that? And
I know,
I'm like,
because it is.
It's like amazing. Like if you show up at title and you sign it like 9:30 in the morning, like you can have keys by 1 p.m.
Yep.
That's like, I feel like that's like this, like, wow, that's like amazing. and so anyway, it's like, I think that it's just one of those things where you go, wow.
I know.
Like,
I know.
It's like, wow,
kind of
amazing. Like that we've evolved into that, you know? So, I mean, we're in an amazing space, but I like to just kind of explain a little bit about the background because, again, if you haven't sold for a while or if it's your first time buying, then there are things that it's good to know about. So,
and you know what? I've been doing this 25 years. I still get questions that I can't answer. However,
so true.
Yeah, like we learn
complicated situations
every day. So I want you to know that, if you have questions, reach out.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I leave my phone number?
Absolutely.
My office number is 385-223-8753, and my email is Bergundy, which is BERGUNDYL @realadvantageutah.com. And you can call me with questions, and I can look up the deed on your property and tell you how it's vested so that you know what you need to do for
like if you joint tenants on the title or some of these issues that we talked about.
Do not be afraid to reach out to me. I can help you through this. You do not have to pay an attorney. Now, for a trust, maybe you do, unless you can figure out how to do it.
There's a lot of ways you can do it, kind of online too. There's
but
different
then the
things.
Deed, once you have the trust done, then I can prepare the deed for you for a lot cheaper than an attorney would.
And that's what I was going to say. That's really important because that has saved my clients actually quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just good to know. And if you have aging parents and you're watching this also, you really should look at what their property is looking like. Is it in the joint tenant position, like you're saying? And so it's really good to have that information because I thought about that just recently with my own parents. My parents are 80 years old, and I'm like, because they're kind of in that old train of thought, and so, I even have to say, we've owned it forever, and so I think it's just really important. So just make sure that even if it's, whether it's for yourself or like aging parents, it's just an important area to just have that understanding.
It is.
So, well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Burgundy's amazing. And so, anyway, thank you so much, and tune in again next week. And thanks for watching.